Hey guys, what's up? Thought I'd come on and finish some of my story from the other day. Let's see, I was talking about, I think what I'll go into is my gynocentric mother, my adopted mom. She met my dad when she was 18. My dad and his sister and his sister's husband were friends, and the sister's husband and my dad were in the Navy together back in like the 60s or something. I think 50s or 60s, probably 60s, early 60s. And my mom and my dad's sister were friends in like school together. So they started dating, and my dad had already been married and was driving truck and had a daughter. And he got divorced and left her, and she was living like way on the East Coast somewhere, the wife. And when my dad started dating my mom, her parents were very religious, and my grandma and grandpa thought it wouldn't last because my dad was already married, and that was, you know, you're talking about the 60s, and they got married the same year of the first Super Bowl. So of course that was like, you know, he'd already been married, already had a kid. That was awful. Their daughter was only 18, and my dad was 6 years older than her. My mom was born in 46, my dad was born in 40. So they thought it could never work, right? And they ended up being together obviously for 48 years. So it didn't work for 48 years. And that just goes to tell you that your parents don't know shit. They ran away and eloped, got married in Loveland, Colorado, when their parents were in Denver. So yeah, they did that. They were together for 14 years or something like that, I think, until about 1979, and they started. My mom couldn't have kids. And here's the thing with the gynocentric stuff. Most women try to tag onto a guy with kids. You know, that's the easiest way to get a guy to hang out with you and stay with you. And for some reason, my mom thought that would be a way to, you know, my dad, obviously, because he had a daughter but he never seen her, wanted kids. And I think my mom didn't really care because she really liked kids, but my mom had tons of aunts and cousins and uncles and stuff that had kids, and she was able to babysit and all this kind of stuff. She didn't really care. So my dad must have talked her into it and got her into where she wanted to have a kid. So she decided to adopt me. And they adopted me in 1980 when I was 7 years old. And I had a pretty bad childhood. If you've watched my old videos and stuff, you'll know my childhood before that point was pretty bad. After getting adopted, I was with my parents until I was about 14, and then things started going wrong, and I ended up in treatment facilities for drugs and alcohol, and also for manic depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar, and I ended up being on medication. I spent a lot of time in the hospital because my mother had burned me when I was a kid, so I had lots of surgeries I had to have done. So my whole childhood until I was like 14 was kind of in and out of the house, and I didn't really spend much of time. And because of my childhood, I never really became really attached. There's a lot of studies in psychology that show that if you have children, like say if you're married and you have a kid, say after you're together a couple years, and then you let that kid grow up to about 7 years old, and you have another kid, the thing that will happen is, psychologically this has been shown, that if you have a 7-year-old kid and a newborn, they actually don't really connect. They're on like a different wavelength. They're kind of already past that whole like, you know, this is my brother type thing. So they kind of like separate. So if you have like, if you don't have your children within like 3 years of each other, they don't really feel like siblings. They don't really act like siblings, you know. So I was already 7, and they adopted me, and I didn't really attach myself to them like they were my parents. So I spent the whole time in turmoil, kind of like, you know, acting like an ass basically my whole childhood. And I got out of treatment when I was like 16 and a half, almost 17. And when I turned 17, we moved to Kansas. I lived there in my parents' home for maybe about a year and a half at most, probably less than a year. And then I left and moved to Hutchinson. And once I moved to Hutchinson, I was there for maybe a year and a half. And then I had enough of Kansas. Kansas was a fucking shithole. I didn't want to live there no more. And it was just, Kansas is one of those states that sucks you in. It gets you there, gets you in debt, and you get to the point where it's kind of like the job I was talking about where I sold books door to door, coupon books. The thing is once you're at a point where you don't have any more money left and you're kind of stuck, that's where they get you. And that's kind of what you got going on when you live in Kansas. They'll get you with like tickets or something like that, and they get you to where you're stuck and you can't leave because you don't have enough money to leave even if you want to. And you can't save up money because you're always having to spend money on shit. And that it just kind of sucks you dry of life. And I hate that state. So I left in '93. And when I left, I ended up meeting my second wife. And was with her for about almost 4 years. And then I hadn't even been back to see my mom and dad when I left in '93. It was like October of '93, and I didn't come back to see my parents until like the summer of '95, I think, something like that. So it was like 2.5, almost 3 years after that. And I came back and seen them, and then I left again, and then I came back like a year later. And then I went to college, and I had separated with my wife, and I was separated from her for about a year. And then I went back with I went back to college. I was like 24 and a half or something like that at the time. And I met my third wife, which was my Japanese wife. And after being with her, I went to see my parents in November, and I ended up going to see them again after Thanksgiving that time. Then my son was born in July the next year in '99, and I went to see him in actually they came out to Denver, and they seen me there, and then we went to a reunion for my father's side up in Nebraska, and then we went down to see them just before we left. My son was turning a year old, so we celebrated my son turning 1 year old in Kansas and stayed there for 2 weeks, and then we flew out from Kansas, from Wichita, to go to Japan. And I didn't come back to America for 3.5 years after that. And when I came back, I stayed with my parents for about 2 weeks, and then I moved into Hutchinson. I was living in Kansas again because that was after being stuck in Japan. That was like the only thing I could do is go. I had no friends, no family, you know, besides my parents. So I had really no choice but to go back to fucking Kansas. And I went back to Kansas and stayed there for a little while. And then my wife had came back over. She was there for like 2 weeks, and then she left, and then I ended up driving truck for Warner, and I left and went out on the road, and I was gone for 8 months. And never lived anywhere really besides my rig. And when I got done with that job, I lost my driver's license, and I ended up going back to Japan. And then I didn't see I left in like November, and I didn't come back to the U.S. till August the next year. And the next year, my dad had died in July. So I'm telling you all this because it became very clear once I came back to see my mom after all of this, that me and my mom never really connected, I don't think. And I don't think she ever really wanted me as a kid. So what ended up happening was she was very distant when I came back, and she didn't really act like she was my mom. She wasn't talking to me like she was my mom, and she seemed like she was very uncomfortable, you know, and like she didn't really want to talk to me much at all. And it was like she was just kind of trying to like push everything away, like, you know, you're not really my son, my husband's dead, I would just want to get on with my life, and you're part of the old life, so, you know, kind of like that. And after being there for about 2 months, I went back to Japan. And I called my mom a few times, and she just seemed to get more and more distant. And then she moved from where she was living at into Hutchinson, and didn't give me her phone number, and just like disappeared, you know. So I haven't really talked to her now in 8 years. The last time I talked to her was like 2007? No, wait. Yeah, 2007, I think. Yeah, so the thing is most women want to have a child so they can lock a guy in, so they get you kind of stuck in the environment that you're in. And when they do that, it becomes easy for them to keep you, to kind of control you, and use that child as a way to control you. But my dad had emphysema. He had smoked cigarettes since he was 15, and when they adopted me, I was allergic to nicotine, so I got really sick to my stomach, and he couldn't smoke cigarettes around me, and just I wasn't actually allergic to the smoke, I was allergic to the nicotine, which was on the car windows, door handles, everything, and everything I touched that touched me, I just got really, really sick. So my dad quit smoking for me. The problem is he had smoked for so long, he quit. 2 years after he quit, he developed emphysema. And, you know, logic goes out the window for some people, because my dad's mom died of emphysema, my dad's sister died of emphysema, my dad's dad died of emphysema. There was all these people that died of emphysema in his family, and all of them were sick from emphysema, and my dad was still smoking cigarettes. Go figure. So, you know, people just aren't very smart. But my dad ended up getting on Social Security disability after a while, but he moved. The doctors told him that he had to move from Colorado because he was kind of sick, you know, from being at such a high elevation or something, or the climate was too dry, or I don't know. So he ended up moving to Nebraska. We moved to Nebraska when I was like 14 or 13, and he worked for a place over there and worked for a little while, and then he got sick enough to where he couldn't work anymore, so he stopped working, and my mom started being kind of the support. But because my dad had worked for a company in Denver for so long, when he did that, he got a really good settlement from them for his retirement. So he was getting a good settlement from retirement and a good disability as well. Plus he had really good insurance because he was on Social Security. And I was able, because of my past and my dad being on Social Security disability, I was able to get on disability as well. So when I was going to these things, you know, these clinics and stuff like that, and seeing psychologists and stuff, and getting operations on myself and stuff, I was able to be paid for through that. So I think it got to the point where, because of this, my mom really had no way to lock my dad down. And my dad was making even better money than my mom, and he wasn't even working. And it was just because he had been in the Navy, and then he had worked on a job for 15 years and had a good pension from that. And then he also went and he worked someplace else, and then he got on Social Security disability. So after 15 years of having this job and then getting disability, and then he was part of the Teamsters, so he got money from that. So he ended up making maybe like $1,200 or $1,300 a month, and he wasn't even doing anything. He didn't have to worry about it. So he was able to pay all the bills. He was still able to take care of my mom, and it got less of a thing where she really cared much about having a kid, about having me. So I became less of a less of a thing. It was just kind of something like I was the family pet more than I was a child. And I think that's like one thing why she was hoping, once I left the home and once I got out of the picture, that I would just disappear and not come back. And I think that's what she was hoping. And that's kind of basically what I did. And she was very happy about that. But that's one reason why we haven't talked in so long, because she wasn't really able to use me as a way to grab a hold of my dad and keep him in a marriage that maybe he wasn't wanting to be in, because he loved my mom and he would do anything for her, but all he wanted was a kid. And she got him a kid, and then when he died, she didn't want me as her kid, and she just kind of left it at that. And I kind of figured it out, but I was just kind of like living my own life and didn't really care. But I kind of knew that a long time ago, because I could tell by the way my dad treated me and the way my mom treated me. It was completely different. So this is what I'm getting out of the gynocentrics with my life, is my mom didn't really want kids because she could tell that she didn't need them, first of all, to get my dad, to keep my dad, but she needed him to make my dad feel like they had a real family. My dad wanted a real family, and with a real family you need a dog and a kid. So my dad had a dog and he wanted a kid, so he got me, and my mom just thought it was another dog. So that's kind of the where I would take that, is this is kind of the dynamic that you're going to find in most real relationships. Is it's really rare to see a mother treat a child, a son especially, in a really caring, loving way, like they would a daughter. They're always more. I think it's because the daughter can actually give them more kids, and sons tend to leave. You always hear those stories about how the son never calls the mom, and daughters are always over at mom's house. So they tend to lavish more love onto the daughter than they do the son, because with the son, it's much easier for them to just forget about them. And once the son leaves the home, they know that they probably won't see him much anymore. And after they get married and have kids and stuff like that, a lot of like with psychology, we tell a lot of kids, when you get married, the best thing for you to do for your relationship when you get married is get as far away from your family as you can for at least 1 year, so that you can become kind of a cohesive unit. You don't want your family interfering with your relationship, so that you can kind of get to know each other. So it's really good if you're from, say, like California, it's good for you to just pick up after you get married and move to fucking like New York, move to fucking Virginia, move someplace all the way across the fucking world and live there. And a lot of people do that. And because they do that, the parents might only see them once every year, maybe around Christmas or Thanksgiving or something like that. They might fly in once a year. So a lot of times the mom knows that if you have a son, you're probably, once they leave and go to college or something like that, you're not really going to see them much anymore. And they kind of flip that switch as soon as they leave the home. And they become very distant. The longer you're away from them, they become more and more distant. But if you have a daughter, it's not like that. They kind of keep them in the fold. And that's a very something I notice a lot when I talk to sons and when I talk to daughters. Is this is even something here in Japan that you see is especially if you're not the firstborn. In Japan, if you're the firstborn son, you have to take care of your family, your mother's family and your father's family. You have to take care of the dad and the mom, and maybe even the because like if the family that you married into only, this is what will fuck up people getting married in Japan as well. Another thing with the herbivore men, if you marry a daughter that has no brother, then there's nobody to take care of her family. So if you marry a daughter that has no older son, you're on the hook to take care of her family as well. So if you're the oldest son in your family and she only has her, then you're going to end up having to take care of your family when they get old, and you're going to have to take care of her family when they get old. And everybody comes to live at your home. So you're going to have two old dads and two old moms living in your home, and then they're going to try to mingle and take care of your kids. So this is another reason why a lot of parents in Japan and a lot of kids in Japan don't want to get married, because they don't want that to, especially if they're the head of the household, you know, the man, the only boy. And it's why you'll see a lot of them move away. That's why a lot of them are starting to do that, because they don't want that responsibility. They would rather just leave. So their parents may be from, like, you know, Hokkaido or something. They'll move all the way to Okinawa. They'll get like all the way fucking as far away from them as they can, and they'll come back and visit them every once in a while, but they don't want to take care of them. So they tell the parents, like, I live down there, I got a job, I can't do that, you know, or something. And they try to get as far away from them as they can. And that stuff is fueling the herbivore men as well. So, yeah, this is the story of my mom and what's going on with our relationship as of now, which is, it's non-existent. I haven't talked to her in 8 years, over 8 years. So that's just my life, and you know, I'm adopted, and I have basically only my two sons here, which I haven't talked to in over 6 years. I haven't talked to my mom in 8 years. My adopted father is dead. I haven't talked to any of my adopted family in 10 years. So basically I'm just alone, you know, is basically how it is. So I'm kind of the truest form of the MGTOW and herbivore, because I have like nobody, you know, and I'm just like going my own way, literally with nobody. You know, that's basically how my life is going. You know, I have nobody to count on but myself. I have no girlfriends, don't want them, don't care to associate with many people. I'm kind of a loner, and I'm fine on my own. And, you know, it gets lonely sometimes, but you just learn to deal with it. It's not a big deal. I've got my music stuff, you know. I've got my guitars and my music, and that keeps me happy. And I don't really worry about it too much. So, yeah, that's Gynocentrics in my life, anyways. And thanks for watching. You know, if you have any questions, comments, whatever, leave them in the section below. If you got any ideas for videos you might want to see, leave those in the section below. Share, comment, and like and subscribe. Have a nice day.